Hey, hello everyone. Welcome to the Product Analytics PMUX Weekly. Our first agenda item is a sticky. I don't know if Sam or Dennis, you probably know the most about it if you want to talk about that.
The only sticky we have is that menu discussion, but which is due today. But y'all have been working on that, and we have a point on it that for Rob has set up, so we can just save that for when we get to it in the agenda.
Cool. Um, we have no action items, so that's always nice. Um, then the next point is mine. The dashboard working group discussed the need for a high-level map of all the big pieces that make up a dashboard. Think about this as like the regions, the filters, the widgets, etc., and also what you call those. Um, so I'll share what Product Analytics has decided with the emphasis that this is alpha and subject to change, and that we're open to working with the group on these changes. So yeah, I've linked to the meeting notes there. I've also asked the question that I found some deprecated designs that I think I can use as like a base for creating these like blocks. And I just want to check if that's something that I can use going forward, or if we need to rethink it. Dennis, you have a point there.
Yeah, I think it's a good start because I mean, that's what we use in the proof of concept, and then that's what we based our requirements for the dashboard off of, which, of course, the data going to be displayed has changed, but the regions are still accurate in terms of here's where your dashboard level controls are. Here's where the widgets are going to show. I would I don't know if it's showing the editability of it, but I would say yeah, like a basic wireframe is also good to go. Like I don't know if that's something that's going to be quicker to do in Figma or not, but I mean just a napkin drawing almost just to show like here's where editability will go. Here's what we plan to do as far as like editability for widgets and things like that. But basing something off of that is a good start because that hasn't changed too much in terms of how we defined dashboards now for the internal preview is what I'm trying to say. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
great. Yeah, it does. And thanks for answering. Yeah, Rob, in terms of answering your question about would a basic wireframe be better, I totally agree. What I envision this to be is like a super abstracted version of what we have, make it as easy to consume as possible. I'll start with the first iteration of just being the static view and then create an issue, and then we can discuss further on like how we can iterate this to show stuff like editability, etc. Cool.
That works for me. That'd be great.
Great. Sam, I see your
Yeah,
typing
so I'll
something.
vocalize and type. I'm trying to think how to ask my question. So I need to read through the meeting notes for the working group. What is the expectation of the outcomes of this working group and our actions will take based on the decisions of the working group? Like one thing I'm mindful of is if since we're actively working on dashboards, does the working group come up with mandates that we have to start following with V1 and essentially the working group is defining our requirements for us? Or is this making general guidance for GitLab? Like what is the purpose of the working group, the outcomes, and what is the action that we're going to have to take as a result?
I can give my understanding of it, but Dennis, Rob, please also fill in. My understanding is that the working group is there to kind of set out the guideline or recommendation for what a dashboard should be, but it's a two-way door at the moment. So there isn't a well-defined like idea of what a dashboard should be right now, and we're busy contributing to that. So I think it is a healthy space and time for us to say like, hey, here's what product analytics is doing. Open it up to also see what like Optimize is doing, and basically just reach a consensus so that we can deliver like consistent like naming and design for all of our dashboards.
That's my impression as well. The working group currently, as it is, I feel, is generally kind of not as defined as it should be. They're very focused on like nomenclature and things like that, but I don't think they've. I know they haven't fully and this is to no fault at all, but like they've only just gathered like the number of different dashboards that exist in GitLab, but haven't really evaluated the full capabilities of what dashboards we have so far and what dashboards we're building in the future, specifically calling out what product analytics and optimize are doing. So I think it's going to expand further because they're kind of just like they're asking very cursory questions like what is a dashboard, what are things displayed on a dashboard, but like Marshall and others have and I and Jan have like brought up like, well, we're going to be looking at configurable dashboards and like we need to define what capabilities those will like we want them to do, as well as like what we expect as an organization as GitLab to be able to like allow customers to do. Like, will we lock certain functions? Is that a thing? Like, do users always have like full customizability of dashboards? Is every dashboard going to be customizable? So I feel like that's going to expand. And I guess in terms of your question about based on the current goals and the potential for that to expand, we're at a interesting point where, which is why Jan and I are bringing this up, is like we have a really good opportunity for us to kind of show what we've been working on and help influence that and like say like here are our needs and here's what we think we need, and get their feedback on it to see if they agree, but also then work with them to say, hey, like, do you agree on the naming for these things, or conceptually do you agree with it, so that we can help contribute to that instead of it feeling like the working group is determining things and we have to come back to it later on in a different revision and like update it to be in accordance with it. So I would say we have a good opportunity to just like collaborate and reduce that the chance of that happening, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that helps. Thanks. And I'll read through the full set of meeting notes and I'll ping y'all if I have questions.
Yeah, there are recordings for both, so it's should be cool. Fairly easy to catch up on.
So the next point, unless anyone else has anything further to discuss on that. No, my next point was the just to touch base around the menu structure issue that we have from our last meeting. It feels like we're very close to final agreement, at which point we need to start adding epics and issues against each of these screens as per our to-dos on that issue. So I just wanted to see if anyone had anything they'd like to discuss. I started it off with a question around if we're going to need any tabs. Sam, it sounds like you have a perfectly valid point to vocalize on that one.
Yeah, so your proposed structure, Rob, I really like it in terms of how the buttons and the screens are laid out. It didn't seem to me like tabs would be appropriate for any of the things that are listed there that we'd want to split it up on. In general, I feel like tabs are a good way to represent a similar sort of workflow with a different axis of data, but that's not what any of this proposed structure is. So none of this to me jumped out as this should be a tab rather than a new screen. I don't know if others felt differently.
Yeah, I agree with you. The tab, I can see tabs being useful maybe on an advanced dashboards once we get to like version 4 schema. I'm thinking to have tabbable dashboards to get different angles on the same sort of data structures without overly crowding one dashboard. But I don't see any particular action right now that makes sense as a tab. Possibly query designer. You could have a dashboard as like the dashboard and then have a second tab where you go to the query designer and changes to the query designer are reflected immediately in the dashboard and stuff. But that is possibly I don't see that as an immediate requirement, and nor do I see it as something that is a blocker or something that necessarily needs to be considered for this initial structure that we're trying to push forward.
Agreed. And that's actually a good segue into my next point about query designer. I feel like we should make this more prominent in the menu structure than it currently is. One of the workflows we will see users following is, I have a bunch of raw data. I don't really know what's in the data to be able to create a dashboard to display it. I want to explore my data first. And the query designer is a great way to be able to explore that data dynamically. So I feel like we should make this more prominent. a proposed solution, let me know what y'all think, is moving the button query designer, and I put this in the agenda as well, basically moving it up one level. So you would have the top level dashboard screen, then you would have the button to do instrumentation, create a new dashboard, or look at the query designer directly there, and then your individual dashboard listing would be there.
Is query designer a good name?
Different question.
Okay,
Whatever we call,
ignore me.
for
That is a
technology
good question.
called query designer, that's what I'm talking about. But
yes.
we could probably call it something different, but that's a different topic.
Yeah, that's fair. Sorry. My initial sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say my my more relevant thought while you were talking was almost lost it. Do we have to support additional workflows depending on how you access the query designer? Because basically what I'm thinking is like if you hit query designer from a specific dashboard, it has like this button saying add to dashboard, right? So the context is there that like if you're in audience, for example, and then you hit query designer, you are effectively exploring data, but then with the intent to add that widget or visual or widget to the audience dashboard. If we take that out, do we have to support an additional workflow of like, okay, you hit add to dashboard, but now you have to pick which dashboard. And then like, how does that save things? And that becomes a much more complex workflow, especially given now that the query designer has no way of actually saving or adding to dashboards. So I guess that's a really long way because I'm processing it myself that if it's within the dashboard, we know which YAML file to go to. And I think that would simplify things from a technical implementation point of view. If we pull it out, which I agree would make sense to like kind of highlight and bring out on its own, that sounds like it should be a separate iteration because we're going to have to support a little bit more of a complex workflow in terms of how you actually apply that to dashboards and save it to the respective YAML files, if that makes sense.
That is exactly what I wanted to bring up. This feels like a good second like iteration on this feature. Because yeah, managing those contexts about like where do you want to save this, how we're going to present that in terms of like the UX, how we're going to build that in the front end. That's quite a bit of added complexity that I would think would be better maybe for a second iteration.
I would second the second iteration. I can see this being useful in terms of our MR workflow approach. You click new, go straight to query designer, you fill out your query, and then you press create and it goes create it, or editing, and it pre-fills the query designer with all your queries that you've already written, sort of thing. As to whether to bring it up, I feel like we could have the button in both places.
So also in the menu itself, you're saying, or?
I mean, the button on the dashboard level as well as on the individual level. Because right now it's disassociated entirely from the flow, but it is a valid point that we should make it more discoverable, at least initially, and it's an easy win for us to just have that button in existence, if that makes sense, because it's not associated to any one particular flow right now. But when next iteration, when we start adding it into the flow, that's when we want to
Rob,
potentially
can you just clarify what that button is? Because I'm not sure about if you're talking about the menu item button or the button on the dashboard screen.
Button on the dashboard screen. It's outside the menu system as per the document, that note.
And so on the dashboard screen, are you saying the individual dashboards, or in addition to the individual dashboards, all the dashboard list view as well?
Yeah, both.
Okay, because the dashboard list view kind of approaches the same issue with the menu link item, where it's like you don't have any linked dashboard to it, then you have to support, like if you hit add to dashboard, where does it go?
Well, so for this one, remember the problem we're trying to solve here is discoverability of what's in the data set. If what we iterate towards is a different experience for this dashboard, individual dashboard list version of Query Designer, and the individual dashboard context Query Designer being different experiences, that's okay. It's the discoverability problem that's really the top of my mind right now for this.
Right. And so the more discoverability we go for, whether it's the dashboard list view or the menu bar, the menu link, that I feel like would have additional complexity than what even we plan to put into the query designer to link it back to like actually adding and saving to dashboards. So I agree, like we should go for as much discoverability for this, but the further we bring it out, the more prominent we make it, the more work we do have to accomplish to get there. So like in terms of iteration and efficiency, I don't know if that's something we want to gun for or aim for as part of.
I'm primarily concerned about user workflow problems here, less so on our ease of implementation necessarily. If it is hard to implement, let's find ways to pare it back. Simple solution, let's just remove the save button and you only get the GUI designer and the code tab. Then we don't have any sort of context or anything needed, and it's still going to be discoverable at that top level as the button.
Okay, but you were saying you're concerned about discoverability, but also concerned about user experience. But the more discoverable we make it, the more complex it is to like make sure that user experience is, I guess, as easy as possible. So the two kind of work against each other, I feel like. But
I guess I don't follow your point there.
I guess so. You're willing to cut functionality from query designer to get it out as much as possible. Is that what you're aiming for?
Like, well, so I don't believe we're cutting functionality for this because we don't have any sort of save experience today to go from code tab, MR, and a YAML file and an MR to saved, correct? Our existing functionality that we've seen in the demos is just the GUI designer and the code tab. What I'm proposing is just instead of making that experience live underneath each individual dashboard, moving that to the top level dashboard screen. Like there shouldn't, right. I don't believe there's any sort of individual dashboard context required for what we now.
We plan to imminently, and Tim has called this out in the last two demos, to like add that saving functionality, and that as it's currently demoing is within that individual dashboard. So my understanding, and I know Tim has started to put some epics together for this, and we need to define that, is that we are wanting to get to that point of saving or adding to a dashboard very soon. If we bring this out, I think that would change that and would increase the scope of being able to save that functionality. And then you were saying, I think earlier, that if we can bring it out to make it more discoverable, but then remove the add to dashboard functionality, then I think that changes the direction that I would assume that Tim was heading towards. Maybe it's a better discussion to have. I guess I'm not sure where to go from here, because I agree, like it would be great to bring it out, like make it more discoverable, but also we don't have a good idea of how well this query designer is defined, so it's hard to like make that decision, I feel like, right now. If that makes sense.
The thing that Sam brought up also made me think of what we do for our hard-coded dashboards, because it will probably be a similar experience where if you can use the query designer, you can use it, but you can't save it. So you'll have the code output, but you won't ever be able to write to the file. So that's a whole thing we'll have to figure out, I guess.
Yeah, and that's my understanding of like what we want to figure out sooner rather than later. I guess my question to you, sorry, Rob, did you want to vocalize?
I feel like there's the issue here is that the query designer is being built without any kind of UX or product necessarily deep dive input. We're not thinking about the problem before we're building the problem. We're just building a solution, which is definitely one way to go, just to get it out there, but isn't necessarily going to be conducive to integration with the rest of the system that we're necessarily building, which is now we're starting to feel that tension, right? Like right now, as Sam says, we could, what we've said already is we could literally just take this exact query designer that Tim has put a lot of effort into and just put it on two different levels. We don't have, we could put it on the dashboards and on the individuals. Right now, all it does is allow you to discover data and visualizations that you can use with that data, which you could then put into dashboards. But we don't yet have any ability to take our static dashboards that we're coding with a milestone into interpretation that we're not going to be changing that yet for a while. into a savable environment. We've not even discussed the user flow on how to go from a static dashboard into a savable dashboard, or how to create new ones yet. So it feels like we're putting the cart before the horse in terms of the query designer.
Yeah,
So
you're evaluating it based on like how it exists currently, but we have no visibility into, or not, there's no clearly defined visibility into like where it intends to go. I'm just going off of what Tim has said in terms of he really wants us to be able to save the dashboards, but that opens up a host of other questions. So I just feel like discussing this menu item is a question that's based on an answer we don't yet have, if that makes sense. But I guess my question to you, Sam, is like, do you feel strongly that this is something that we would have as a first iteration? Like when we do expose Query Designer, would you prefer to have this like at the forefront? Because that is something worth noting so that we can help shape the direction of where the Query Designer is going to go.
Yeah, I feel that we need to have the ability to explore the data be something that's easy to get to without having to require the user to go through multiple clicks through different screens to get there easily.
And that's actually why I asked about the name, because I feel like Query Designer's intent on like specifically for like building the dashboard versus like I was thinking of Data Explorer, which is I think similar, but a different purpose of just literally playing with the data with no intent to actually save that anywhere. You can marry the two eventually, but that's why I asked about the naming. But yeah.
Well, and part of, since we are getting a bit turned around on what like individual query designer requirements are going to look like, and that we have all these questions we still need to, I agree, answer. Part of the reason, remember, we're doing this proposed menu structure is so that we have a more concrete proposal to go back and talk with the rest of the UX org with about our left sidebar discussion as well. So I think this is a good point to call out that we're having some friction on this topic, but also we don't necessarily have to solve this question today necessarily. If we have an open question around it, we can put that in our proposal for the information architecture and move the other thread forward in orthogonally to while we figure out what are we going to do for this specific topic. Just to remind everyone on that part.
No, I mean that if anything, that kind of proves my point from last time about like, yeah, we have 4 items right now, but we're literally like thinking up of another feature. Like, yeah, there's our 5th one. So
Okay. Well, so let's put a pin on this and come back to it then. And we need to get requirements put together for that. Another question I had on this proposal is funnel analysis right now. That's proposed to be a widget that goes on an individual dashboard. Do we need a top level menu item for this? What's going to go there that wouldn't be covered by the individual widget and the file backed configuration for that?
You need a way to define those funnels. And ultimately that creates a schema in Cube. And that I think would be what you would select from that funnel widget. So to be fair, like I quite literally just like thought of that in the call with Rob, because I haven't really thought through how funnel designers are going to work, because we know we want to get to it, but we haven't yet. But I do feel like there is a bit of a designer or workflow of sorts where you will have to like want to give a little bit more functionality or breathing room to set up those funnels, and not be constrained to a widget container, if that makes sense.
So we will need some sort of editor experience around there beyond just what's available in the YAML schema.
That is my theory, because that will contribute to the YAML schema or a different YAML schema, or actually interface with Cube to actually set up that schema. Yeah, oh gosh, they're all schemas. Everything's schemas. There will be a workflow where we have to save or synchronize that to Cube so that it can be reported on by the user. So like that's the first one. And I also feel like as part of, and we're at time, but as part of viewing a funnel in the dashboard, I would imagine there will be some type of like in-depth analysis that you would want to do specifically for like, think perhaps it's a pre-baked in-depth funnel view of like, here's why things are converting, or you can dive deeper into that. And that's potentially another item that I would expect to see in like the funnel analysis. I guess it could potentially exist as its own another dashboard, but those are just kind of like off the top of my head, like why we would eventually need a section for funnel analysis.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, since we are at time, in terms of next steps, if we have other feedback on this, let's go async for this. But what I think we need to do for an action item before the close of week is to reply back on that left sidebar organization issue with the broader UX folks to re-engage on that discussion now that we have a more concrete proposal. Do you think, well, I guess, does anyone have any other comments we want to discuss async, or are we good to move to that other thread now?
We need to add the issue/epics links to the different menus, but other than that, if we're okay with the general top level structure, even if we don't have an exact agreement on the finer details like within those, then I think that's fine. Just proving we've got a minimum of 4 unique pages that we need is what we want to prove, isn't it?
Correct.
Yeah, and I'm all on board with what we've got so far, including the core designer. How we get there is a different question, but like I agree, like generally, like we should feature that more prominently.
Okay, cool. Well, let's try and get the I'll spend some time today, or if other folks want to do it before close of business today, to add links here, and I'll plan to put that comment back to the other issue tomorrow then, unless anyone pings and says, hey, we should chat about something before then. Great. Anything else? All right, sounds good. Thanks, sounds good. Thanks, Sam. See ya.
Yeah.